I'm Athea Davis, by the way. I am on the operations team at the Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully. I'm also a board member, so I will be facilitating this event tonight. Some of you I've seen in our past events, so I'm happy to see some faces back. It being 7 o'clock, I always follow the great Zooms. Learn so much. Great to hear, Barbara. Anybody else? Once it looks like Judith's still trying to connect. Would love to hear what brought you to the event tonight. I'm going to minimize some screen so I can see what I'm doing, but I want to welcome you to our Beyond SEL, Social Emotional Learning, Trauma Resilient Mindfulness for the whole student, teacher, and parent, something I think is vitally important. And I'm really honored to welcome Bidyut to our event tonight. He is the founder and executive director of the Niroga Institute, and I'm going to hand it off to him to share just a snippet about who you are, what you've been up to, and we'll dive right into the event.
Great. Thank you, Thea, for that introduction. And let's plunge right in. As Thea said, if you're comfortable, keep your video on so that we have a little sense of virtual community. Let's also make this as interactive as possible. Any thought, question, comment, idea that you have during this hour together, feel free to populate the chat window to share your responses to reactions and so on. And so if you like Thea asked already, we'd like to just type into the chat window who you are and what brought you to this particular Zoom session. That would be handy. It was almost like your way to say, okay, this is my expectation, why I'm here. And so we shall see how it all goes. Here comes Mina, the familiar entity.
Yep. Hi, Mina. And then I think Lisa just joined. Welcome. Happy to have you here. Hey.
Good to see you, BK.
Hi, Judith. It's good to see your face.
Nice to see you, Judith.
Hello.
Okay, so it's a couple minutes after 5 Pacific time, and so why don't we plunge right in?
Yep.
Let's begin with a mindful moment, yeah? So how about we come up sitting tall? All I mean by that is our ears, our shoulders, our hips gently lining up one above the other. Feel free to keep your eyes closed if you're comfortable, or find a point in front of you that you can hold with a soft gaze. Eyes and mouth softened, relaxed. Chest and abdomen, neck and shoulders relaxed as well. And let's bring our attention to our own breathing. Breathing naturally, not trying to change it in any way. Starting to feel each breath, each bit of each breath, just as it's happening, moment by moment. The air flowing in and out through your nostrils. The chest and abdomen relaxed, perhaps gently expanding as you breathe in, floating back towards your spine as you're breathing out. And as you continue to keep your attention on your own breathing, let's add another layer to it, a bit of rhythm. Breathing in to a count of 3 or 4, and breathing out twice as slowly to 6 or 8, perhaps like this. Breathing in, 2, 3, and breathing out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Your own count, your own pace. Continuing to feel each breath, and now perhaps starting to watch it a little bit more closely. Are you breathing fast or slow? Is your breathing shallow, or is it pretty deep? How's the flow? Choppy, jagged, or really smooth? Becoming intimately familiar with each bit of each breath, just as it's unfolding moment by moment. And as we continue this bit of rhythmic breathing, let's add yet another layer to it. If you're comfortable, resting a hand on your belly, your abdomen, otherwise just visualizing your hand resting there. Your other hand could be resting on your first hand, or perhaps resting on your heart as you start to tune into your own heartbeat and the ebb and flow of your abdominal cage with each breath. And now as you breathe in to a count of 3 or 4, gently pushing your belly hand forward and out in a big, giant balloon belly breath. And as you breathe out twice as slowly to 6 or 8, actively, gently pulling your abdomen in towards your spine. Deep and rhythmic belly breathing as you continue to feel each breath, to watch each breath, and now perhaps starting to watch each thought, each movement of your mind, breath by breath, moment by moment. And as you continue this bit of rhythmic belly breathing, one more layer of mindfulness, one strike of this chime, gently calling us to the present, listening for the very last trace of this fading, evanescent sound, with your fullest possible attention. Relax and breathe normally. So opening up your eyes, coming back into our little virtual huddle. So here we are. The topic for today is going beyond SEL, as in social emotional learning, and then talking about trauma resilience as it applies to the whole child, the whole teacher, the whole parent. And so two things to think about in the topic itself that we'll try to address in this bit of time together. Social emotional learning has been talked about for quite a while, and yet we all well know that social emotional capabilities aren't just something that a child needs, that a student needs, right? A stressed out child can create a stressed out teacher, or a stressed out parent, and a stressed out child, a teacher or parent can absolutely create a more stressed out child, and so on. So social emotional skills are needed in the entire ecosystem of our schools and our communities, our homes, and so on. And so looking at going beyond social emotional learning to social emotional teaching, to social emotional parenting. So that is that extension, the idea of SEL, SET, SEP. And then this business of trauma. We all know the ubiquity of trauma in our communities. Many sources of trauma, many of us are quite familiar with them, whether it's adversity in childhood, as in developmental trauma, adverse childhood experiences, historical and intergenerational trauma, structural trauma and racial trauma from microaggressions, from inequity in our social, political, financial structures, many, many different kinds of trauma that affect so many of us. And yet, even if we don't have any of these sources of primary trauma, if we're serving someone who has some of this trauma, we can't avoid getting the trauma secondarily, just like we can't avoid secondhand smoke, even if we're a non-smoker and someone's smoking around us. And so that is the idea of looking at, how to make mindfulness trauma resilient. And so those are the two explorations. I have a very short PowerPoint deck, and we'll weave through those few slides. And as I said before, feel free to pipe in with your thoughts, comments, questions, ideas, liberally populating the chat window. We'll try to have a little bit of time at the end for, just Q&A, but don't wait for it. Feel free to just pipe in whenever your heart feels like it. So with that, a moment to do a quick screen share. So hopefully everyone can see the title slide. Yes, great. And so what we did here was looking at the power of breath awareness versus breath regulation. And this sweet picture is Shaka, one of our program managers, with a couple of middle school student peer leaders leading a whole bunch of middle school principals and district leaders in practice in Oakland Unified School District that was happening in a school in Oakland, Frick Middle School, in a very challenging part of Oakland. We often think, oh, I use the breath in my mindfulness practice. So I bring my attention to my breath awareness. But of course, breath awareness is wonderful. And yet moving from breath awareness to breath regulation is a significant evolution in impact. And of course, the reason for that is pretty simple. We know that how we feel changes how we breathe. Most of us are tuned into that reality. And yet, even as people figured this out thousands of years ago, they asked a really beautiful, intelligent, important question. Does it go the other way? Changing the way we breathe, does it change the way we feel? And they experimented on themselves, and sure enough, absolutely. And the reason this is so important is just imagine if you are feeling really, really mad, and someone walks by and says, come on, calm down. How is that supposed to help? Often it has quite the opposite effect. It gets you even more pissed off. Similarly, if a child near you is feeling really sad, you say, come on, get over it. Easy enough to say, but it's not that easy to change how we feel. And yet with a little bit of training, we can learn how to change how we breathe. And that can have a very, quick and immediate, palpable, measurable impact on how we are feeling. So breath regulation has much to do with emotion regulation. And so now as we talk about trauma hyphenated words have been populating our space for a long time, it seems. Trauma is getting a lot of traction, a lot of bandwidth. And so all of a sudden, we find trauma informed. From there, trauma responsive, trauma sensitive, trauma conscious, on and on. In fact, recently, I found one more new one, trauma infused, and I was cracking up that it's getting to be like vitamin D water, right? What is your trauma flavored with? And so that's a question to all of you. Feel free to populate in the chat window if you found some more trauma hyphenated words that people are peddling. It's getting quite interesting. Some have also said, hey, to heck with trauma. Let's talk about healing centered. There's trauma, oh, it has this label of illness or sickness. And so there are all these games that we play, perhaps, around trauma, depending on what we are marketing. But the fact is that when we talk about, someone has trauma and say, okay, they're acting out and say, what's wrong with you? And then from there, we say, all right, now we've all learned about trauma. We know about past and present and so on. And so we ask a more benign question, what's happening to you? I feel very strongly that we have no business asking that second question if we can't get to the third question, is how can I help you? In fact, we can't even stop there. We have to get to the fourth question. How can I help you help yourself? Then we're talking about real, resilience. And that is the subject of, some of the stuff that we're talking about. So we can't afford to just be dependent on someone else to try to manage our trauma. There are ways in which we can actually absolutely heal our trauma and move from, a trauma victim to a trauma survivor to someone who has had trauma. There's a whole progression of healing. And so talking about mindfulness and thinking about how this plays out in the space of ubiquitous trauma. What are the broad classifications of mindfulness? I'm not talking about any one particular program or any one particular, approach. I'm talking about general types of mindfulness where we start to think about, is my mindfulness trauma-informed or trauma-resilient? That is a question I think we need to ask if we're going to work with people who have a lot of trauma. And so when you think about neuroscience, the research has been pointing quite clearly at mindfulness, saying, you know what, attention control, emotion regulation, adaptive coping, or healthy coping, and empathy, all of these things are impacted by stress and trauma, and mindfulness practices really help. So that's wonderful. We know a practice, a time-tested practice that's been around for 5,000 years and more, the self-reflective capacity of the human mind, that has much to do with mitigating the effects of stress and trauma. And when I talk about stress, I mean chronic stress, toxic stress, traumatic stress, and PTSD and more. People are now saying there's nothing about post-traumatic stress disorder. It's actually pervasive, it's persistent. That's how we want to think about the P in PTSD. And so, mindfulness. So you think, okay, mindful. What is the mind full of in mindfulness? We need to go beyond, long-standing definitions of mindfulness around present moment awareness, non-judgmental, et cetera, to make it as simple as possible so that even a little 5-year-old or a toddler can understand, right? And so what is the mind full of in mindfulness? Centering our minds in the present as opposed to allowing it to go to past and future. That is one way to think about it, perhaps. But even as you think about mindfulness, there are two broad classifications: static or sedentary mindfulness, right? So you're sitting still and you're trying to watch your mind. Some people think, oh, I'm trying to empty my mind. And of course, you quickly realize how difficult it is. So essentially, the two broad ways in which we try to be mindful, whether it's focused attention or open monitoring, as scholars say, but static or sedentary. So you're sitting still, maybe even lying down, and you're trying to fill your mind with the present. So then from there, what else? You could be sitting still or lying still, trying to watch your mind, or you could be moving. Movement-based, or what we call dynamic mindfulness. Now, why do we need to look at these two? Because neuroscience in itself is only providing us with a partial solution. Trauma research, the last 40 years worth of work with Bessel van der Kolk and Bruce Perry and so many others, is clearly suggesting that we hold trauma, we hold stress in our bodies. Our issues are squarely in our tissues. And you can't talk your way out of trauma. What do you need to do? So you got to move. And so not just body awareness, which is often there in static or sedentary mindfulness, where we're bringing our attention to our own body, a body scan and so on and so forth. But if your body isn't moving, then by definition, your mindfulness is not trauma-informed. Does that make sense? To claim that my mindfulness is trauma-informed, trauma-conscious, trauma-resilient, what have you, you have to be moving mindfully. It's like mindfulness and movement, the whole, as in mindful movement or movement-based mindfulness, is absolutely greater than the sum of the parts. And once you get that, you start to realize, okay, mindful movement. We are moving, and we're moving mindfully, not just flailing around with arms and legs. But when that movement becomes mindful, that is a way to start to very deliberately open up our window of tolerance and gently start to get to the edge of trauma and back and so on, creating a pathway for healing the trauma to build the resilience that we need. And so here is a takeaway, perhaps, that to make mindfulness trauma resilient, it has to be a combination of movement and static mindfulness. So it's squarely pointing at dynamic mindfulness. And if you're familiar with some of the research that Adele Diamond and her team at University of British Columbia at Vancouver did for the last several years and published a major paper, a landmark paper in 2020 of January, that was basically looking at different ways to develop and to improve executive functions. If you don't know what exactly executive functions are, they are some of the things that, these higher order capabilities that we use for emotion regulation, for cognitive flexibility, for reasoning, and so much more. And Adele and her team at UBC, University of British Columbia at Vancouver, is looking all across the world at ways in which we can improve our executive functions, because they have much to do with academic performance, with making healthy life choices, with enhancing the quality of our lives. So we know the importance of EFs. And they said, okay, let's look across the world. 179 studies, 193 papers, looking at all the ways in which we think we could enhance, develop, improve executive functions. Cognitive training, computerized, non-computerized, neurofeedback, mindfulness, static and movement-based, and then all kinds of other ways that we think might be involved. Sports, whether it's strength training, cardiovascular, etc., whether it's music, theater, journaling, poetry, you name it, tried all kinds of these, 193 papers. And guess what was the ultimate finding? It's a direct quote from Adele's landmark 500-page and more paper, that movement-based mindfulness is by far the most effective in every single category of comparison for developing improved EFs. So this isn't about a nice thing to do. Instead of sitting quietly, we start to move more mindfully. To be able to develop our executive functions, to become more trauma resilient, dynamic mindfulness is absolutely critical. And so with that, why don't we feel it for ourselves? In the mindfulness tradition for thousands of years, nobody cares much about what you know and what you can quote and what you can rattle off. It's what have you felt? What have you realized, right? So in that spirit, if you're up for it, then let's come up standing. If you really need to keep sitting, of course, we can create a simple variation where you can do this sitting. But otherwise, let's come up standing. And we see if we're able to do a little bit of what these kids in the school are doing, which is like a gentle spinal twist. So let's try this. I'll move my chair out to the side. And you can see, in fact, if you keep your video enabled, I'll stop the share for a moment. And we can actually have a little sense of a community of practice, right? And so here we are, standing tall, here shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles lining up. Feet are apart, a stable base, perhaps a hip width, shoulder width apart, nothing too far apart, nothing too close, just so you're stable and you're comfortable. And then from here, you just start twisting from side to side. A simple, joyful, childlike movement. You're leading with your hips. You're following through with your shoulders. Your head and neck turning from side to side. Perhaps your eyes tracking your movement. Your arms could be resting on your hips, or they could be swinging out on the sides as far as you're comfortable. And just getting comfortable with this deceptively simple movement. You're gently twisting your spine across a vertical axis. And now the breath. I mentioned that every movement has a breath associated with it. So here's the breath with this particular movement. Like a quick puff of air out at each end. And so the inhale takes care of itself as you transition through the center. And feel free to add as much speed and power and momentum as you like. You can raise alternate heels to add a little element of balance and perhaps going a little deeper into the twist. Just make it your own. Just for a few rounds, back and forth. A spinal twist. slowly reducing your oscillations and gradually coming back to the center, slowing down and coming back to your chairs. And then once again, our friend the chime, as we sit tall and relaxed on strike, listening with our fullest possible attention for the very last trace of this fading sound. Thank you all. And so if you want to just, a little test and an exercise in self-awareness, just take a moment and say, okay, I just did this twist real fast, real quick. How did it feel? One word, one phrase to type into the chat window. So this is what I felt. There's no right or wrong answer, of course. Let's see what pops up. Mina, it's a pleasure to see your son there. What apology? Out of the question. Wonderful. Yes. So Mina says she's feeling a little expensive. What else? Feeling more tingly. A joyous feeling. Sramathia. Relaxed. Lucid in my torso. Uplifted. I mean, these are interesting words, right? It's like a couple of minutes of practice. Like our friend Dan Siegel says, VK, this is brilliant. It's like from dental hygiene to mental hygiene, right? So it's like 1 or 2 minute practices. And just look at some of the words. It's not just calm and relaxed and so on, but to feel expansive, to feel uplifted. There's so many possibilities that show up, even in moments of practice. And so it's all wonderful. Let's continue on. Let's see what else is in store, yeah? And so once again, a little bit more of the share. Did I lose all of you? Let's see. I'll get back to the share. Okay. And so, okay, so we did this quick spinal twist together. And I'll keep the chat window out here so Athea and I can watch if there's something that comes up that we can address right away. But now let's talk about this whole business of social emotional learning and its extension to SET, SCP, and so on. And so quite a few years ago, Castle invited a bunch of us to their headquarters in Chicago. Half of the folks there were SEL folks, and about half of us were mindfulness folks. And so saying, let's just have a conversation, a discussion about the connections between SEL and mindfulness. And there was a lot of talk and such over a few days. And I presented this one slide there years ago. And I said, look, this is not about one or the other, SEL or mindfulness. Mindfulness in many ways provides the very foundation for social emotional learning to really happen. And why is that? If you look at the wheel on the right, that's the SEL wheel that Castle often talks about, 5 core competencies. And then you look at transformative life skills, dynamic mindfulness, movement-based mindfulness. We also have a wheel, and you see Ford there. I mean, it's color-coded for your convenience. You say, all right, self-awareness shows up in both, right, in green. And then you have self-management and responsible decision-making, and that, of course, maps to emotion regulation. And then you have the blue, the interpersonal. We say, all right, social awareness is needed for relationship skills, and that, of course, affects healthy relationships. But as you look at these two, just take a moment and see if you can type out in the chat window 2 differences between the wheels. One is pretty obvious, and one is a little subtler. Let's see if you can find what is the difference between the 2 wheels. The obvious one, of course, you see, stress resilience. In big red, it doesn't exist in the castle wheel. From everything we know from, brain development and learning, when our brains are saturated with stress and with trauma, then all these wonderful SEL competencies aren't quite ready to even take off, right? So there are many of us in many of our communities where we have disproportionately high stress and trauma. And so we owe it to us in this conversation about trauma resilience to make sure that we're also looking at stress and trauma as our way to address inequity, right? The way Niroga thinks about this is that if there is significantly greater stress and trauma in some communities, don't we owe it to ourselves to bring trauma resilient practices with disproportionately greater intensity to these communities to try to level the playing field? That's the work. Equity isn't just theoretical. And so, yes, stress resilience is called out very specifically, very deliberately, very clearly in our wheel. But what is the second difference? Yes, social emotional skills contribute to resilience, as Judith said, and Athea says mindfulness is SEL. So you're starting to see connections between SEL and mindfulness and resilience. It's all good. But what is the second difference between the wheels? Beyond the obvious one, stress resilience. Anyone?
Well, you're calling out the emotion regulation in the transformative life skills, which is, often seen as a component of the interpersonal and the self-management, but it's being highlighted here more specifically.
Yeah, I mean, here, if you look at the color coding, Amina, you see, okay, the self-management is essential for responsible decision-making, right? Otherwise, responsible decision-making doesn't happen. And so those two are combined into emotion regulation. That's what we did. So, of course, stress resilience, self-awareness, emotion regulation are all the intrapersonal skills. Those are skills on the inside. And then you get to the interpersonal, which are the social skills, which is, of course, you need social awareness, obviously. That will have to impact your relationship skills, and that is bundled into healthy relationships. So that is how we coalesce these five essentially into three. But the difference here is that there is no implicit or explicit ordering in the SEL wheel. Even though these little corner things are there, you could start anywhere, you could move anywhere you want. For us, there's no way. We feel very strongly that there is absolutely an ordering to this process. You start here at the beginning of Unit 1, then you develop some stress resilience, you get to self-awareness, you develop some self-awareness, you're able to better self-regulate, and then from there you get to healthy relationships and more. So more on that in the next slide. What is this ordering? The 1, 2, 3, 4, the whole person framework, which absolutely extends to the child, the student, the parent, the teacher, you name it. So we're basically saying, okay, build some stress resilience. The work starts with Unit 1, as it were. And so what happens then? Instead of being overwhelmed more often, you're going to be functioning a little bit more optimally. So already a wider window of tolerance, etc., right? So then from there, it's okay, I'm building a little bit of self-awareness. What is the essence of self-awareness? What does it mean? I presented that at a brain development and learning conference years ago, and people said, this is great, this is so elegant, this is exactly it. The essence of self-awareness. I am mad, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm bored. Moving from that to I feel mad, I feel sad, I feel happy, I feel bored. You train a child to tune into getting a little bit of distance between a powerful emotion and yourself, the witness of that emotion, and you're way ahead of the game. If we mix it up so often, how difficult it is to help us, develop this capability in ourselves and others. And then once you get a little sense of that distance between emotion and witness, then you get to the third unit, and that is emotion regulation. But instead of reacting, the essence of emotion regulation is acting, as in choosing our response. That is the essence of it. A school principal just the other day, after years of our work in a school and so on, a huge middle school, is saying, Bika, that's one takeaway from me to this day. Act, don't react. That kind of an idea. That's huge, right? So those are, of course, the intrapersonal capabilities that we're developing. And then in due course, the interpersonal, because as you know, this practice isn't just all tied up inside of ourselves, but it extends to relationships instead of me, mine. It's more of a we, more of a sense of us, a little sense of mutuality that starts to develop. And so you have a framework that basically saying, all right, I start here. I've developed some stress resilience. From there, I develop self-awareness, emotion regulation, healthy relationships, and I go around and around and around that circle that propels us towards self-efficacy, towards self-mastery. Judith had a question. Are you suggesting we detach from our emotions? Not at all. You don't have to detach from them necessarily completely to be able to observe them. That's the beauty of a little training and mindfulness practice, right? We're able to engage in the world and yet also keep that witness perspective. It's just that you're not completely caught up in a powerful emotion. That's all.
Can you talk a little bit more about stress resilience?
Yes. So essentially, the idea of stress, if you look at, I've been talking about emotion window of tolerance. Often you think about, okay, you've got a band within which you're generally functioning. And there'll be ups and downs with emotions, right? I'm sad one moment, I'm joyful in another, positive, negative, etc. But the fact is we often have overshoots and undershoots, right? I'm way too upset, whether it's mad, sad, whatever. And then that's when you go beyond your window of tolerance, and all of a sudden, your behaviors start to show up as fight, flight, or freeze, right? So you're either belligerent, aggressive, flight, as if you're checked out, or freeze, where you're shut down. In schools, we often use the Ds if you don't like the Fs. Disruptive, distracted, disengaged. So those are the behaviors that manifest when we're more stressed out. You check in with yourself, you ask anybody else, when they're stressed out, what happens to us? How do we behave when we're really stressed out? Shorter fuse, more quick to react, etc., etc., etc. We know all of that. And so stress resilience, of course, is the whole process of systematically widening your window of tolerance so that three things happen. You don't get overwhelmed as often. When you do, it's less intense, and you bounce back faster. Each one of these three is a huge gift in terms of developing resilience to stress, because stress reduction doesn't make any sense anymore. Stress isn't about to go away. And so we need to think about stress management, and especially around stress resilience, because stress is here and it's only increasing with every passing day, it seems, given what's happening all around the world. And so with that, let's get to see what we have developed over the years in terms of tools. Niroga Institute is a nonprofit that's been around for 18 years and serving hundreds and hundreds of schools around the country, training tens of thousands of educators, mental health professionals, and more, and serving directly hundreds of thousands of students. It's robustly field tested, in addition to being researched by independent researchers who have published papers in peer-reviewed, top-tier peer-reviewed journals, who have also presented at national and international conferences. And this is not general work around mindfulness, specifically about our work with movement-based or dynamic mindfulness. And so here's a tool that we've developed, an emotion regulation tool. We call it the mood shifter. It used to be a big, beautiful, color-coded poster. And then, of course, during COVID, we realized that the poster is hanging in school classrooms and so on, but everybody is hanging out in their homes. So a little video library, 2-minute practices. And so that is something that is there. You see how we can actually move from stress to relax, from distracted to focus, from anxious to calm, and so on and so forth in moments. So it's an emotion regulation poster. If you want to try or practice sitting down and get a little flavor for it, let us try sun breaths, for example, releasing a little bit of energy. Just feel how it feels for you right now. So you're sitting down, you're comfortable, your hands are there. I'm showing with my elbows flexed so that you can see my hands, but you can keep them on your lap or on your desk or what have you. And say, okay, as I'm breathing in, I'm slowly curling my fingers and turning my hands into big, strong, powerful fists. Nice and strong. And then as I breathe out, I'm starting to gently unfurl my fingers, opening up into receptive palms. Breathing in, hands turn into strong and powerful fists. And breathing out, I'm letting go. As you get comfortable with this deceptively simple movement, let's add the rhythm that you're already familiar with. Breathing in, 2, 3, hands turning into fists, and breathing out twice as slowly, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Breathing in, 2, 3, breathing out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just back and forth a few times at your own pace, in your own way. And as you get comfortable with this breathing pattern and this little movement, perhaps starting to weave in not just movement, not just mindfulness, but also perhaps a bit of meaning or metaphor. As you're breathing in, hands turning into fists, perhaps asking yourself, what I'm holding on to? What am I clinging to? What would I like to hold on to? And as I'm letting go, breathing out twice as slowly, and Lord knows it's harder to let go. What am I letting go? What would I like to let go? What baggage? What judgment? What criticism? What more? The 3 M's, right? Movement, mindfulness, meaning. Your own meaning that you infuse into this movement. And now, as you continue this for a couple more rounds, our friend the chime, gently calling us back into the immediate present. Relax and breathe normally. Opening up your eyes, coming back into our little huddle, and once again, a little exercise in self-awareness. One word, one phrase. Just how did that feel for you? It's what you felt. It's completely your experience. Okay, feeling more relaxed. What else? Feeling more centered. Anyone else want to share how this little sun breaths felt? Okay. So as you can see, whether, to focus when we're distracted, to relax when we're stressed, etc., this poster was designed very strengths-based. It wasn't about what do I do when I'm mad? What do I do when I'm sad? It really asks a simple question, how do I want to feel? And then you have practices to move you in that direction. And then moving right along, this whole business of empowerment, that is the core of resilience work, that we created a little curated kit of half a dozen things, 5 objects actually, that help with creating a mindful space. You see the poster as a mini poster. You see activity card decks. These are all bilingual. You see that little pinwheel, which is actually a training tool for lengthening the exhale, which many of us know has much to do with evoking the relaxation response. And so it's a way to gently, it's almost like pursing your lips, breathing out through a straw, that kind of a thing. But then this pinwheel turns, and a child quickly learns that, oh, if I breathe out really slowly, I can watch the pinwheel turning. A little kushball-like thing that is, again, for sensory work, especially with children in the autism spectrum, the tactility. You can use it to just squeeze, of course. You can use it on your forehead when you're lying down as a hint of tactile awareness, like almost like an eye pillow. You could use it to rub arms, etc. Just many different ways to be able to use this for sensory impact. The chime that we're already using in this seminar, and so on. So just different ways to create a mindful space where a child, a youth, can realize that, yes, a place where it feels safe, is conducive to mindfulness. It's a place for a time in instead of a time out. Teachers are using this kind of a space in their classrooms. People are using this in their homes and so on. And then from there, an obvious extension, something that we've been working on for quite a while. And so this launched just this last Christmas. And so it's a mobile app, essentially taking that mood regulation poster and plopping it into an app. And now you have your practice in the pocket. It's a whole string of 2-minute practices. You have the option of standing or sitting. You can make your own playlist. You can choose your own favorites. There are ways to help you create and develop and sustain a regular habit. You can also track mood shifts across a single session, across multiple sessions over a week, a month, and so on. You can earn badges, given streaks around, practice regularity. So just a little bit more interactive, simple video animation with tiny bits of audio narration that helps us, move beyond, the mindfulness apps that you may be familiar with, where some celebrity voice is talking to you for 15 minutes trying to get you a better night's sleep. I mean, we need something more than that, right? What can I do when I need it right here, right now? Where 15 minutes or half an hour of sedentary mindfulness feels like a total luxury in many of the environments where we are in. So just rethinking all of this, keeping the science in mind. And then this idea of moving from learning mindfulness to doing mindfulness to actually living mindfully. And so thinking about not just, oh, I have to do my few minutes of mindfulness practice. The research in our work has been very clear about 6 minutes a day. 6 minutes a day. It doesn't even have to be contiguous. It can be 1 6-minute practice. It could be 2 3-minute practices. It could be 3 2-minute practices. It could be 6 1-minute practices. That is what independent researchers found as we went into classrooms with 3 15-minute sessions a week, with seeing all kinds of beautiful impacts. And that 45 minutes a week, you break it down, that's about 6.5 minutes a day. And so the question is not so much, oh, have I done my little mindfulness for the day? My question is really, when am I not mindful and why? So when I'm walking, biking, driving, just before going to bed, right after waking up, when I'm eating, I'm cooking, I'm folding the laundry, when I'm washing the dishes, all of these things that we think are chores are, of course, opportunities for being a little bit more mindful, right? It doesn't have to be mindless. Before hitting that send button on the email and then regretting, or just before a phone call with a difficult conversation. We're waiting often. There are transitions between different activities throughout our day. It's not just transitions between classes and school. Exercising, sports, just ways in which you can weave mindfulness into daily activities to move beyond just learning and doing mindfulness. The words of a principal are etched in my mind, where basically said, after doing a little bit of practice, because he came to my home, he wanted to bring this to his school, very excited. I said, hey, if you really want to do this, you need to practice it. Gave him a little piece of paper with, half a dozen 2-minute practice. And he took it with him. And then I'm coming into that school again to do kind of a second half of a training for all of his 75, 80 staff, 100 staff, in the big auditorium. And he sees me and he just, calls me, BK, I have something to share. I have something to share. All his staff are waiting there. I said, yes, what is it? Oh, look at the data. Look at the data. Like a 78% drop in referrals and suspensions. He said, I didn't do anything different in this school year between September and November, other than bringing in mindfulness. I said, all right, good. Let me move on, to the training. And he said, I have something more important to share. I said, yes, what is it? I said, that paper that you gave me, I took it to heart. I started doing a little bit of practice regularly. And some very interesting things have happened in my life. My wife, my mother, my children are saying, I'm a more chilled out dude. I'm less reactive. So my relationships are shifting. I'm finding that I can weave this practice into whatever I'm doing. Driving to work and back, walking the dog, cooking in the kitchen, playing with my kids. And then this big man, built like a football player, starts to tear up. Saying, BK is getting to the point where this practice won't let me go. Can you imagine how beautiful that is? This practice won't let me go. That becomes our question, right? Even as we talk about mindfulness. When am I not mindful and why? And so a little vision of possibility where these are kids in a late elementary school in a very challenging part of San Diego, the Barrio Logan district. Unemployment, poverty, food insecurity, crime, violence, guns, gangs, drugs, death, it's all there. And here are these kids that have learned the practice and they're leading the entire school community in practice. Their own peers, their parents, all the staff, and so on. And so with that, I'll stop for now and see what thoughts you have. Any thoughts, comments, questions? Go for it. We have another 8 or so minutes. What thoughts?
I would add too, if anybody has any questions related to anything you've tried in your own context, whether it's a classroom, some other environment where you're working with youth in any way, I think any questions would be appropriate. Struggles, wins, anything that resonated with you in the conversation you'd like Bidyut to elaborate on. Um,
Bye, Meena. Yes, of course. Good to
right.
see you and your son.
Yes. Thank you, Meena, for joining. Judith says, how can you pull people in?
Yes. So this, of course, is around, engagement, compliance, right? As teachers, we're all challenged with that, irrespective of the subject. But in this work, in this trauma resilience work, what we found over 18 years of doing this is that it's not enough to just have a trauma resilient practice. How are we sharing it? And so trauma-informed language, trauma-informed delivery becomes extremely important. And so there are 3 things that we often share with folks that we train. 1, moving from command to invitation. So invitational language becomes extremely important to pull people in. Instead of do this, don't do this, which of course could be an immediate re-trigger, re-traumatization. You're saying, shall we try? Would you like to? That kind of an idea in your own way. The second thing to remember perhaps is that there's no one magical way to do this. Give people choices, give people options. Then you use your own creativity to come up with the options that might make the most sense. So even as people practice, they feel safe. They feel welcomed into the practice. That becomes hugely important. For someone who can do a spinal twist really fast, and powerfully. Another might find that is becoming a trigger. You do it a little bit slower, a little gentler. I often say, as many people doing this practice, that many variations of each movement, each form, that kind of an idea. And then the third is that you want to focus on concrete sensations. When we're practicing these movement-based mindfulness practices, not the time to weave in a bunch of guided imagery. There's nothing wrong with guided imagery, but the reason you want to focus on concrete sensations is that if you are traumatized, then you are uncomfortable in your own body. As Bessel van der Kolk says, you feel like your body is booby-trapped and you don't know when that trap is going to go off. A face, a voice, a place, a smell. And so how to, when you feel that possibility, you want to dissociate, right? You're uncomfortable in your body, so body is here, mind is somewhere else. And that, of course, also gets in the way of real healing. And so how to pull the awareness back into the body, say, you know what, this is interesting. Not all sensations are unbearable. Not all sensations are uncomfortable or painful. You start to become aware of sensations that are not only tolerable, but acceptable. Before long, you start to gradually, widen that window of tolerance and move towards healing. And so if you keep those three things in mind, invitational language, choices and options, and a focus on concrete sensations, like, okay, I'm moving my arm. Can I feel the air on the skin of my arm? I'm sitting. Can I feel my hips on my chair? I'm standing. Can I feel my feet in my shoes on the floor? Very practical, very immediate, very concrete. Then you're continuing to bring that connection between body and mind without that mitigating the desire and the impacts of dissociation. So those are some things to keep in mind that we've found over the years to pull people in. But this question has many different dimensions, right? How do you deal with skeptics? Some may want to lead with the research. Some may need the stories from the field. It all depends on where people are and what they need. A youth who feels like, oh, I don't do mindfulness. What is this? My community doesn't do it. My neighborhood doesn't do it. How are you going to relate to mindfulness? We've created a universal practice that we often peddle as socially elite and culturally incongruent. The mindfulness community is responsible for that. How do we, bust some of those myths and make it as simple, as natural, as universal as possible? Can you relate mindfulness practice to something that someone is already doing? A youth who loves basketball. If you practice a bit of mindfulness, your shooting will get a little bit more accurate. Will you try? That kind of an idea. These movements is not just codified in an app or a poster. What movement do you like to do? Is going to be dance, is going to be martial arts. All of that can be woven in, as long as the essence is this integration of movement and mindfulness. Then it becomes so much more powerful. And so here Lisa has a couple things, quick mindful activities that don't feel like adding something else. Yes, exactly. I mean, teachers and students and family members love this, that a sprinkling of mindfulness throughout the day in tiny little pieces. And that's, teachers, it's like hitting the reset button on Classroom Climate. Absolutely. That is how you want to think about it. And of course, just as Lisa said, you tell people, you've got to sit still, close your eyes, blah, blah, blah. That's not going to cut it. Children want to squirm. I remember in a little early elementary school, they wanted to create a little video of these children doing mindfulness and so on. And so I had them say, okay, you feel like squirming, right? Fidgeting. Can you show how you do that? And then from there, they started to show, okay, now when I get a little bit more mindful, how that squirming changes. And we call that tiny little video Squirming Mindfully. That kind of an idea, right? That it's absolutely, you tell kids to sit still. It's like what Ken Robinson says. For the first 5 years of a kid's life, we're saying, okay, move, 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 talk, talk, talk. And then for the next 12 years, we say, shut up and sit still. This is education for us, right? It's insanity. And now people are saying, oh, yes, we need to figure out how to, weave in movement into education, health and well-being, all of these things are interconnected, healing trauma and so on and so forth. So yes, the movement has many dimensions that are beyond just the neuroscience. It has applications so universally. And we have been seeing this throughout our work, because I come from a mindful yoga tradition. That's what I learned since I was a little kid. And so movement and mindfulness and breath regulation are all absolutely squarely part of the mindful yoga tradition. And that is how this all, came together. Mindfulness wasn't just cooked up by the Buddha. You look at the form and you say sitting in, lotus position. That's a very classical yoga form, and he's in meditation with the spine erect and neutral. Where did that come up from? Did the Buddha just suddenly imagine it from the sky? Heck no. It's founded on thousands and thousands of years of mindfulness practices, in India and in Hindu philosophy and so on and so forth. We don't need to talk about that. We don't have to chant Sanskrit. We can normalize it. And that's why I say moving and breathing. What is more secular than that? What is more normal than that? That's what we're all doing. And so with that, I think, Thea, we're up at the end of our time together.
Yes, thank you. It's been so great, but yet really some awesome information that you've shared with us. If you want to share any links in the chat, thank you, Lisa and Judith, for those questions and insights. If you wanted to perhaps share where, if anybody's interested in purchasing the kits or connecting to you, there we go. Your email. Yeah.
And you have our website. You can go onto it. You can see what we have, and can go onto our online store, etc., etc. All of that is there.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. We will put this event and the membership Ph.D. section online very soon, probably within the week. So if you want to revisit and take more notes, it will be there very soon. Appreciate your time, Bidyut, and so excited for the app and all that you're creating. So thank you for your insights and your wisdom and putting your mindfulness in action out in the world.
Sure thing. Thank you all. It was a pleasure engaging with all of you. Take good care, and we'll be in touch. Bye. Bye.